Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, share your favorite episodes, and jot down our information when you see it. My name is Andy Libson. I'm a teacher and socialist here in Oakland. And of course, we are joined again by Kenny, a community organizer and socialist here in San Francisco, and Jessica, who teaches English literature and writing at the university level in Pacific Northwest. And you will see that we also have another guest, a special guest who has been a frequent guest here on What's Left, Allison McDowell. And I guess, Allison, I know that you're still doing Wrench in the Gears, but when Allison joins us, or every time Allison joins us, I think of things like Fourth Industrial Revolution. I think about blockchain. I think about the metaverse. I think about data. I think about social impact investing. And I also think about, though, the notion, Allison, you often talk about is not being able to use the master's tools. And the idea that in understanding all this technology, there has to be an understanding that this technology is not being made to improve our lives, and we won't be able to use it to get the kind of world we want. And actually, I think the other thing I feel like you've often said, Allison, is what capitalism did to Blacks and Africans in slavery and to indigenous people in establishing itself in the accumulation of capital. I kind of feel like you believe now the world is in a place where the rest of us are going to be joining them in a kind of hellhole of lack of rights, of basically mass exploitation. And I feel like that's the kind of vision you spelled out for the future. So that's my introduction of you.
The planned future. Their plan, those in power, right?
Yeah.
It's not a foregone conclusion, but
correct.
We have
That's
to get
the plan.
Clarity about it. Yeah.
So, and today we were hoping to kind of start with an introduction to blockchain and then see where it takes us. I know, Allison, you've been spending a lot of time talking about blockchain and its implications and whether it can be used, and some of the other things that co-opted cryptocurrency can be used to keep us out of this dark future. And we thought it'd be a good chance to kind of get more deeply into what blockchain is, and then it's the fact that it's being introduced as a technology of control and of data collection and data movement. What does it mean for our future? Does that sound about right?
Sounds good.
Okay. So, Kenny, you said you had a question that we might want to start with, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious as to what we think blockchain is, because, the first way I came to hear blockchain on a regular basis in more than one way was through Allison. And so I'm curious as to where we're at now. I know, Jessica, you're joining this conversation with Allison, and please prepare yourself.
It's not that bad.
I usually go into a daze of a few days, and then I go back. But so I'm just curious as to what we think, what we've heard about blockchain. It's not a quiz, Jessica. I'm just curious as to where we think it is. And I don't know if you guys want to start or you want me to start.
The best way I understand blockchain is this decentralized nodes of data storage. The few elements that I know about it are the decentralization is supposed to be a basis for privacy and for security. But the other piece I know about it is it's massive enough that it seems to be able to allow all of the information about us, all the financial things we do, educational things we do, any place we go, to always be stored somewhere. Even if it's decentralized, all that information is accessible in some way, shape, or form on this weird node-like infrastructure. And so in my mind, what it has done is it turned, like I have a file at work that has some stuff in it, it's pieces of paper, but that's very limited. And what it is, in my mind, what blockchain is it's you take, instead of just this limited file where there's some writing about what my transcript might have been and where I might have worked before, I feel like everything I do and everything I've done is now stored somewhere. And my file just has gone from just being a small file to like an entire file of my life collected on a digital platform, with the notion that somehow I control it, but I feel like I don't. So that's the first thing I would say.
That's good.
Kenny, I'll go over to you, and then we'll finish up with Jessica.
So, I've heard this stuff that you just described more here, like with Allison. I don't hear much of that outside. I hear blockchain in relation to cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. That is how I hear it being spoken of. Yes, they do sell privacy. They do sell, freedom of sorts, liberty, and also like that is supposed, again, to protect you. And it's this wonderful thing, that just came to be, and people are excited about Bitcoin, right? And so, but I've heard this other stuff, right? Like the stuff that Allison talks, the implications for education, for our personal information, especially those of kids, right? I've heard it in terms of ed tech. And so, but I still didn't have a working understanding of what it is exactly, blockchain. And so I have looked into it, a little bit. I have a better sense, of how it operates, in terms of, like the data packets, and how like it has dates, and like it has a traceable, there's a traceable line, I guess, in information that is created and is connected. And so in some ways, I personally had come to think of one of at least one aspect of blockchain is about private property on a digital, world, because it traces, I saw the other day that like the first NFT house was sold, like real estate, right? And so what is an NFT? Like non-fungible token. And so I went down that rabbit hole, right? And it is connected. But again, like, I think there is a massive difference of what is spoken in public is very limited. And again, it's just in relation to cryptocurrency, really, that like the news covers blockchain, at least from my experience.
Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I think I share most of what you guys articulated in terms of my working understanding. I definitely, like outside of these types of spaces, I definitely hear it being associated pretty much exclusively with crypto and with like financial transactions. But I know, the area that I've looked into the most probably is ed tech, just coming to this as a teacher myself. I guess I kind of think of it as just like a data ledger, like a giant expanding data ledger. I know we're going to talk about Lego, and I almost like, searching for metaphors in my mind, I kind of think of like these blocks, like mapping out our digital identities and our lives. And also, right, it's about privacy, but it's, supposedly about privacy, but also they can't be moved, right? So even if one of those blocks, gets stuck onto another block, like even if it's wrong, like even if the information about you is incorrect, it can't be undone, as I understand it.
You could like add another block that said, "Oh, don't pay attention to that block," but it doesn't.
Like JK.
No, that's all really good. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, that touches on a lot of things. For me, I think part of the challenge with blockchain is because it's been so closely held with like digital money and our understanding of what money is, which is about to, I think, fundamentally change. It's hard to have these other conversations. But like what Kenny, when you were saying about the NFTs, this idea that things can be tokenized, anything can be tokenized. You can represent a material item as a digital token, like with the house. You didn't actually buy the house. You just bought a digital ownership thing, like in a mural of the house, but you didn't actually get access to the house itself. So it's a digital representation. And in that way, like the shift in capitalism to digital capitalism is central, because the blockchain is what tracks your property, the things you own, as well as your rights and privileges from the material world to the digital world. Does that make sense? So like, for capitalism to continue to grow and expand, we've kind of reached the outer limits of what the physical world can do for us. And so now they're building a replica for the growth, right? Like it's going to be coded, and then we're going to live in there. And so like, there's not only a you, there's a virtual you, there's maybe 5 virtual yous. And then all of that has property attached to it, rights, money, fake money, the fiction of all of this stuff circulating. But it needs the blockchain to essentially be the portal that links the digital you to the real you. So, I mean, I think that's really central in this. I think people imagine like digital money is just being in the material world, but really it's about the metaverse. It's about doing all of that. And I will also say a key word around blockchain is trust. They talk about blockchain trust, and it's because we're going into the next phase of globalization, which is something that I find really frustrating in us. Like, it's not really being discussed. It's like, there are many people who throw around the word globalist, but they're not actually talking about the economic paradigm of globalization and what the last phase did, to dispossessed labor and the growth of the prison industrial complex and the drug wars and all of that sort of thing. The next phase is going to be much more intense, because now they're planning on digitizing services, which some teachers have already experienced before the pandemic, like with VIP Kid and online tutoring services. And that was sort of built off of the call center, and tech support industries. And then it's going farther. So now with the creation of more sophisticated online platforms for graphical and engineering design, as well as these telepresence robots, this is going to go to places I don't think we can imagine. But that means that you're existing in a trustless world. And so if you're competing for labor on the other side of the planet, they don't know you. Like this, there isn't even like a person who's going to take the AI sorting of the resumes and like narrow down the 50 candidates for the job interviews. Like literally, it's going to just be scaled based on what's in your blockchain wallet. Like that's, and what your reputation score is. And that's going to depend on like what kind of work you get. And it's going to be more and more precarious. So all of this stuff rolls on your digital identity, which will be assigned to you likely through the government, and I think that's the thing that's concerning me now, is even with the rollbacks on some of the health requirements, now I feel like what's going to surge forward is the electronic government stuff. Like they'll backpedal off of the health for maybe a, part of a year, and then they'll surge with like, okay, now, but everybody needs to have a digital identity to access the internet, or your digital government to file your taxes, your digital identity to file your taxes, or your driver's licenses, and that's going to be the next campaign. And unfortunately, the health freedom community hasn't, I think they're getting there with understanding digital identity, but they're still mostly equating it with the health freedom thing, not the metaverse. Although that's changed. I don't know, maybe you guys can tell me if it seems like it's maybe changed in the last quarter. People know it better.
I want to why do you think it is or has been so difficult for people who are really fixated on fighting some of the health stuff and like the vaccine mandates and that? Like, why is it so hard for them to grasp or prioritize?
Well, I think it's really hard. Like, part of it is like your worldview. So we've lost the liberals and progressives and lefts for the most part, right? Like most of those, 90% of those people, for whatever reason, blame it on the nanotech. Like they can't get it. So then you're left with people who predominantly have more of a conservative view or a libertarian view. But that is also like embedded in the get the government out of your life framework, which directly feeds into the blockchain paradigm. Unfortunately, and that's, I think, what we're seeing with like the Canadian convoy now is like it's shifting into like a crypto program. And unfortunately, like there was a clip I put out, like someone shared it with me, of Justin Trudeau's half brother, and he's somehow involved in this. And he's like, Yeah, get the government. The government is so terrible. Like, we should just break this whole thing down and like replace it with a decentralized autonomous organization. Like, literally, like, we should just replace elected officials with HAL, the computer. And then that would be a blockchain, right? And so, unfortunately, and when you start to back up and look at some of the major donors, and again, it's always follow the money. Like, these are people with ties to tech and AI and crypto. It didn't just happen that way, which is not to say that the average person on the street, I'm sure they have not much clue. But like, within the narrative structure, the libertarian Bitcoin crypto crew has been taken out, like, a substantial chunk of the conservatives into that zone, right? And so then you're sort of left with like, well, I have sort of progressive values, but the progressives aren't with me. And I know that the tools that the libertarians are pushing are going to lead to further like mercenary servitude. It may not be by the government, but it will be by Peter Thiel or someone else. So, but it's very hard to have that conversation with them because the narrative has been claimed, and then there's certain key figures, the celebrity figures have been fixated on keeping your eyeballs on fear, depopulation, virus, like the virus narrative, never very limited on the expansion. Like, if it's expanding, I think it's because there's pressure being put on them. They kind of they can't ignore it anymore. But, yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard being almost 2 years in and realizing like I don't know, Andy, like at first I thought, well, I'm just going to be able to explain to people what's happening. And then the people who have bigger voices than me will pick it up and they'll understand too. And then we'll make progress and have a strategy. And that hasn't happened. But I don't think it's because my analysis is wrong. I just think that we're in weaponized narrative warfare. And unfortunately, the resistance, such as it is certainly not a monolith.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are not thinking strategically about what the long-term plan is. They don't know the plan. I mean, I think that they can kind of see that the plan is transhumanism, but they don't know exactly how it is going to get there. And how it is going to get there is through blockchain. It's the hive mind consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's going to be injected through the education system and the health system. But, I've kind of like left the health freedom stuff for the time being because it's pointless for me to try to engage because I'm not going to change anybody's position now. So I've just gone back to the education space, which was my home territory, because it's going to come around.
Mm-hmm. And I want to check, Kenny, you might have had a question or comment, and I want to come back to this because I have a slightly different, I think I have a more optimistic view of the territory in the anti-mandate world around the stuff around digital stuff. But Kenny, I wanted to see if you had a comment or either something you wanted to say.
Yeah, I just kind of want to backtrack and still connect it with this stuff that you're saying. Just on I've been reading Fabio Vighi. We had an article here before, and I read this title. This most recent one is "The Central Bankers' Long COVID and Incurable Condition." And so then there's a paragraph there where he talks about, in the introduction, about like basically the limitations of capitalism, right? From automation. He talks about since the 1980s, automation has, pushed one of the contradictions of capitalism, right? Which is like how much you're replacing labor, then who are you extracting value from? And so this is where I think blockchain, again, I don't know if it's an accidental creation, but it does solve that riddle, to that, at least from my vantage point, that, yes, you're going to replace people's jobs, but they can still produce value and sell something, of theirs, right? Instead of their time, they can sell their data and then still participates in this economy. And then, this is why it's so important. And there's such a push for ID 2020, and the World Bank, owns projects of incorporating the global South, right? The people without digital identities, right? Because it's not so much to uplift them, and because I read a book a long time ago. I don't remember the title, but it's just something along the lines of like 2/3 of the world economy happens in the informal sector.
Yeah.
But if you bring them, with digital identity, then you're casting a bigger net, of people. And especially with blockchain and these technologies of data collection, then you can not only bring more people into the web, but just break shit down in the smaller pieces and make profit of more things. So it's an expansion of markets, right? That is the need of capitalism. And so I guess like kind of my question, maybe we can address it later, is like, like, is this something that just happened? Was this a product of the system itself? Because again, it's sold as a libertarian project, like dismissing the government bureaucracy and all this stuff. That's what Bitcoin is being sold as. But there is projects going on in Africa, right, of digital currency, and then we need to understand, this is what stood out to me, what you said, that we don't understand money, because yes, we are doing transactions digitally, but digital currency is different than just having your money from your bank account, that you're collecting by selling your labor. And so I think there is a difference there that at least I want to explore, because like there are more implications, just more than just having the money that you go and sell your time for. I think that, there is going to be other ways that you gain value to exchange it for those services and the ability to participate in society. And so I guess my point is, like, regardless, whether it was created on purpose to solve this riddle of capitalism, it is here and it's convenient and it solves that riddle, at least for me, for the capitalists in continuing to expand exploitations of people and nature in general.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things, and what I meant about changing views of money, and a lot of this, like my friend Jason Bosch, he's been studying the monetary system for a long time, and that's is new to me. But he talked about wanting to write a children's book about like freedom tickets, because he's like, money isn't really money. Money is stuff. It gives you the freedom to do things, right? If you have lots of money, then you can do whatever you want, and if you don't, you can't. And so it's really buying access. And buying comforts and buying things, but it's not necessarily the denominations, but it's the type of life you can have if you have how many freedom tickets you have. And so I think as we start to tokenize rights and privileges, which I think will be increasingly tied to, biosurveillance testing, going on, is like, do you have a token in your wallet that says you're allowed to do this for this set time period? That essentially everything will become tokenized. And, I had an exchange with this guy who is the head of the Learning Economy Foundation. And he's like, oh no, it's great. The blockchain, everything is like, we're not trying to take advantage of people. Everybody has data privacy and it's wonderful. And I said, it doesn't really matter if it's private, if what we've built is a spatial web world where what you're allowed to do is based on the tokens in your digital wallet. If you walk up to a store and you don't have the digital token to make the door open, it doesn't really matter that it's private technically. Is that anyone around you who can see that you can't open the door knows that you don't have the token. Like your world is ruled by a tokenized cyber physical system. And like, we haven't had a conversation as a society if we want to live that way. I said, I don't care if I have data privacy. I don't want to live in a world governed by smart toilet tokens. And I've talked about that before, like wake up in the morning and, combine the drug testing stuff with your smart toilet and you get a token, whether you're allowed, how you can participate in society. And so I think that's the new form of currency. I mean, Kenny, you weren't exactly saying that, but that's where it goes next is, you might have X amount of like stuff you imagine to be currency, but then your other value is like, how are you allowed to participate? And those tokens may end up even being more valuable.
Well, Kenny's taken this conversation in a slightly different direction, but I do want to say something about it because I also want to come back to the question of what the heck's wrong with people? Are they going to be stuck on, things?
Yeah.
But we'll see. And of course, at some point we'll be talking more about blockchain. So here's what comes to mind for me as it relates to the things about blockchain and the economic aspect of it, or the idea that they might have solved a riddle of crisis. Because what are the riddles they have to solve? They have to solve the business cycle, in my opinion, the falling rate of profit, and how do they do that? And it makes me think about World War I. It makes me think about a time when There were socialists who said, "Oh, yeah, capitalism is going into crisis," but they figured out how to get around that crisis: monopoly, credit system, the certain levels of state organization that they thought were going to lead towards solving these crises. And in fact, there was, in my mind, one of the most smartest Marxists I know of, Rosa Luxemburg. I don't know her, but she wrote these great things. She actually said all these things that they're calling solutions to the problem are only making it greater crisis, which only means that this whole thing is going to come into a crash. And this was all talked about in 1902 or 1903 and 1904, at a time when capitalism was back on the rise, and it led. I mean, she was right, because 1914, 1915, crisis hits, profits nowhere to be found, and it leads to a war in which basically mass capital has to be destroyed, and the new pathways for profits to be refound had to go to World War II, and then another whole mass destruction had to go through, not just in terms of people, but in terms of capital. And I do think about that. Like, I don't know enough about blockchain to know that it hasn't solved the riddle. But here's what it makes me think: it makes me think that it's capitalists thinking they've solved the riddle, but they haven't. Because what it sounds like to me is something that Marx talked about as a growing expression of the crisis, which is larger and larger sections of capital will find itself in the financial sector, in these sort of imaginary sectors that are decoupled from where actual value was, which was the act of human labor in changing something. That's what he said. That's what Marx, the basic idea of Marx is that human labor time decides the actual value of the thing. And that's a theory, but that's what I'm still going off of, even as, if there's 1,000 Marxists in a room, 999 want you to get a jab, are in favor of lockdowns like that. So me and Kenny and a few others are one of the Marxists that don't want to do that. I cannot say that. I'm just saying we're the Marxists who don't want to do that. And unfortunately, the rest of them do.
But see, part of it is like, I don't think that the Marxists in the materialism can take the next step into digital economics and nanotechnology, because it doesn't seem material.
Right.
They're still stuck with the way you described labor and value. And I'm like, no. Actually, labor is going to be changing the nature of labor, the way the nature of money is going to be changing. So, but I don't think, based on my experience for 2 years, they can't process that.
Correct. And I would probably include myself among those group that can't process, because I am still holding to the notion that this doesn't. No, I'm just saying that this is not going to solve the crisis. It's going to lead to a greater crisis of profitability, which will inevitably lead to
Although there's always another crash. I mean, there's always
but I do. That's why for me, because again, I'm not here. I'm just saying that's my framework, and because I do think there's something definitely new going on here, and there is something called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I don't believe it's a solution, and I don't even believe if the capitalists get it to work, it can be a solution. I believe it ends in global competition, and global competition for falling profits, and that's why it's for war. So I'll just say that. I'm not going to say it as like shouldn't necessarily be the part, but I wanted to add that as like I'm still coming from that framework, which is traditional Marxist thinking, I think.
And I just want to clarify that I'm not saying that they've solved the riddle forever, but at least it provides a temporary solution to, again, the pillage that has happened, especially over the last 30 years, right? And so I agree with you. I don't think that this ends in that fully materializing. This world that we are worried about doesn't, because there's still the material reality of these competing nations, right? And for falling profits. And so it is an attempt to solve that riddle. I think it is a temporary fix, but inevitably, I think just like, we talk about climate change is not what's going to undo society, and there are questions about that, even about like what climate change is, if it's real, if it's exaggerated to a degree, especially from this pandemic right now, we know like, hey, like, is that really what they're telling us? And so, but again, there are, forces, that are going to crash, that are competing. And I don't see it. That's what we kind of talk about. I don't see this fully materializing to what they want. The fully technocratic panopticon. It will manifest in many ways, and it is, because I do think that we're coming into focus, but it is still not one thing. It still is like scattered things. At least that's my sense of it, and I don't think we'll see the full like shape of the beast. I think the beast will just crash to in a massive bellic display of the horrible technology that we're producing right now. And so, in that sense, I agree with you. So what I'm saying is that, at least temporarily, I see us more moving to what Alison has talked previously, the nanny state, right? And that's where blockchain comes into this, right?
But it's a nanny state with private investment. So essentially, the public-private partnership, the P3 model, and that's what I think the libertarians don't get, is that actually it's both. The government provides the infrastructure to have access to the people for the investment. If there were no government, eventually maybe they can get to the point that if everybody's on blockchain, they can just do a direct investment. But at least for now in the bridge, they still do need an austerity welfare system to have the apparatus to get to the people until the digital identity stuff is fully fleshed out.
I want to see if Jessica, if you have anything you want to come in on this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I have a few thoughts, but one question I want to raise is just with regard to will this fourth industrial world come to fruition fully? I agree, no, but the question I want to raise is, does it even matter? If it goes fully, and I don't know if we're going to get in at some point to some of the materials Allison had sent, but I'm thinking about that, the video about the exosphere, right? And the whole idea that okay, right now, maybe the technology is not fully there, right? Robots are not capable of completely taking over production or whatever it may be, right? And part of what that video seemed to me to be addressing is okay, well, how did they kind of troubleshoot for that? I think they called it the last 10%, or right, or whatever hiccup that the AI currently can't handle.
Right.
There's a way around that, and even with blockchain, thinking about some of the manifestations of that, programs in poverty-stricken areas that I know you've talked a lot about, Allison, of well, when the system or when the thing doesn't work, it actually doesn't really matter to the whole web, right? It only matters
person
to that person. It's the same way of whatever you're trying to deal with a insurance claim, right? And you call the thing and you have to go through the whole automated thing and you can't get through, and it's not working. And
right.
But who suffers? You. Right. You're the only one that
I know.
suffers. So does it even matter? Say it comes 40% to fruition, or 60% to fruition, or even 10. It's bad. It's still really bad, right? In terms of human cost.
Yeah, I agree. Because a lot of people have been not a lot, but I've had a number of people just say oh, it won't work. The AI, it's not, it'll break it. And I'm no, I'm not saying it's some shiny, seamless, functional system. I'm it's a lurching, broken, treacherous, brutal system. But if you can make people do it, it doesn't really matter if it's shitty. It's just gonna run over you with it, even if it's crap.
Right. The last comment I want to make on this is that I agree with you. It doesn't have to come into full fruition. We're already seeing, right, the ability to wield the tools of this system, right, to censor people, to cancel dissent, and even if we take 2 steps forward, and then they have the ability to ruin your life, right, and squeeze you to submission. It's gonna happen. And I think that's the implications of blockchain. Even the next 2 steps that we're talking about, or maybe that have already been taken, of canceling you out from functioning in society, because again, that's the implication of the vaccine passport thing, right? That it made life so hard for people who dissented, on this. Mm-hmm. We are those people. And it was incredibly, it took an incredible emotional, psychological, financial toll on a lot of us. And again, just take one more step forward, and then that's the implications that there is almost game over. Like, how do you fight back? And how do you then still, again, take up space, right? And how do you, like Lipson has raised that question, how do you go on strike online? And so those are the implications, right? That are only 1 or 2 steps ahead. But at that point, I don't know what else to do,
It's overwhelming.
Yeah. And just to be clear, like, I don't think there's middle ground. There's no stable middle ground here. Like, from my vantage point, they will go on with their plan that they're trying to. I do think it has this element of transhumanism in it, and the digital blockchain and digital IDs and everyone's life on a ledger and all labor essentially being accessible to the capitalist anywhere at any time. And like Jessica was saying, the humans doing 10% of the full job because 90% of it the computer can figure out how to do, and by eventually it can figure the 10% out, because you're helping train the computer by doing the 10%. You're helping train the computer to get better at the 10% as it is. But regardless, so that's a bad. So I would say that capitalism, and thinking that it has a stable future for itself, I would say no, it doesn't. It either leads to global war that leads to an end for us all, some version that makes it very unpleasant to live on the planet, for humans at least, or I do think there needs to be some kind of revolution like that. There's no alternative, and that revolution, I think I still call it socialism, but at the very least, it looks like something like what people are doing in India, in Canada, taking physical space and saying this is ours with their physical bodies. It's not done in the metaverse, and it's not done online. And this is the part I'm becoming more clear on in my head. It's something, Allison, you've raised early on, which is, this is the master's tool stuff, that these tools will not be able to be used as a means of changing the society into the thing we want it to be. We're going to have to use the old tools of things we touch and smell and see and are near, and each other are going to be part of that. And if we don't do that, we're done for. Like, we are done for, I believe.
I just want to add too, I think I've raised this before, but I think another aspect of this whole thing that maybe doesn't get talked about enough is like the data, actually, like all the blockchain data, all of the crypto, all of that, like it doesn't actually live like invisibly in the cloud. Like, you have to have data farms, right? Like, you actually do there's a material violation, as I see it, right, that happens there in terms of ecology and the actual planet that we live on.
Well, and what's overwhelming is the advances that they're making now, because of the intense amount of data storage that's going to come online with the Internet of Things, is they're talking about storing it in DNA. And right now that's all like, oh, it's all artificial DNA, like in a box or something. It's so convenient. You could just store all this stuff. But I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure it's not all going to just stay to be artificial stuff. Like, you don't make stuff as DNA and be like, let's not put it in a body, or put it in living tissues. Like, you're making this DNA. Like, it does feel very matrixy. I mean, It is what it is, but like, I was doing this research, and, I wrote a short story at the end of 2018 where I was talking about this. Like, I talked about like data farms and like little children who were like not qualified to like be on a career pathway with like, it was like the doffers in the, the textile mills, like the little kids would run between the machines and like run between the DNA and whatever. But it's a little, there is a material reality to it. And I think that the DNA data storage is very troubling, like the ethics of what that means.
And haven't they been harvesting all our DNA through testing for 2 years now?
And it's so funny because it's like they do this. We're building this technology. Oh, it looks like we can store information on DNA. Where is there something that has a lot of DNA on it that we can store some data? I'm looking around here. It's scary.
Well, the crazy thing is like when I got off track before, but when this stuff with the Global Education Futures Forum in Chugach, Alaska, and this pilot project in these charter schools that were like partially hybrid in Alaska, targeting indigenous communities. And they were like, oh, well, we're going to train them to be health techs, like at these charter schools. And then they can work. It was like work-based learning. And then they were being lab techs. And then a lot of these programs, in addition to having ties to Exxon, because this was like the area where the oil spill was and the Exxon presence, it was military contracting, because there's actually a lot of defense contracts that run through tribal governments because of like preferencing and contractual arrangements. So it's like they were doing cybersecurity and they were doing health tech. And this is, something I stumbled into in like 2016, 2017. And at the time, it didn't mean anything. I was thinking, like, how are they having high school kids do lab work remotely in Alaska? How weird is that? Like, to me, it made no sense at all. Like, why would you even have any need that high school kids would be doing lab work remotely? Well, now it's like, now we know what they're setting up a global biosurveillance state, and perpetual pandemic. So yeah, now it makes a lot more sense. But 5 years ago, I was just like, I was still stuck in the public school, charter school conversation. And I wasn't even thinking about all this other stuff. But it was, those people, the people who were behind piloting those programs knew what was coming.
Yeah. And I wonder if this is go ahead, Ken.
And I was just going to ask, so what is blockchain?
So do you think we should segue to the video? Or is it?
Can I give a little bit of an intro about Legos first?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to start with Suzanne Gildert, who is with Sanctuary AI in Vancouver at the Singularity Talk. And she's talking about tele-op robots, and that you will put your consciousness through virtual reality into a robot and do remote work. And people will be ultimately competing for this work on blockchain. And as a public school parent, and my child didn't actually participate, but I'd had kind of creepy feelings about the Lego robotics teams for a while. And I had someone that I was acquainted with whose kids were involved. And she was like, yeah, there's Defense Department people at these competitions. And, they're all lifted up as, wonderful or whatever. And so I started going back because the Learning Economy Foundation that I've spent some time and I did a larger presentation on was working with MIT Media Lab and the World Bank and Lego to create app-based games on blockchain so that children 6 years old could earn verifiable credentials. With like Lego branded games on a phone, perhaps in mixed reality, like you would do some like manipulative and document, I guess, on the phone to get a badge. And so this is clearly part of this larger trajectory, but I didn't realize that Lego was working with MIT Media Lab. And it turns out they were one of the first and largest funders of MIT Media Lab, which is a really huge deal. And that relationship went back to the mid 1980s. And so the Mindstorms Lego Robotics Leagues built off of something called Logo, which Seymour, I don't know how you pronounce his name, Papier, looks like paper with a T on the end, Seymour. And he and Marvin Minsky were collaborators at MIT Media Lab. They were specialists in AI. And Papier, he came to MIT after doing work. He was a mathematician with Piaget in Geneva on constructivist learning. Now, this is the stuff that all sort of aligns with like the John Taylor Gatto, like independent thinking. And in some ways, it sounds really good. But if you blend it with what is coming with like Jeff Bezos's push for Montessori pre-K, the idea that if you create independent learners who are just going off and doing their own thing and are being monitored by technology and their learning is happening through digitally mediated technologies, all of that data capture ends up feeding the AI. And the thing about the constructivism, from what I understand, is it sounds good. Again, like learning is personal, learning, is scaffolded, learning is with peers, all of these things that yes, except for if you're doing it at Panopticon and they're watching you to train the machine learning system so that when the edge case robot package delivery hits a tree, it knows what to do. And so when you think about us being part of this, like our children, even down to very young, like toddlers embedded in this web, it's very overwhelming. So anyway, when we look at Suzanne Gilder, I think if we back it up and think that this trajectory with getting the data for us to collaborate with robots, for us to program the robots, is at some point going to flip. And that through our digital twins, it won't be robotic systems, but AI systems start to program us. And in one of the quotes, and this is in a separate clip, but Gilder actually says, she's like, it's going to be wonderful. And this is framed within diversity and inclusion, that, we're going to all, people sit around a fire and tell stories, and a stranger comes up and our reaction is to push them away, but we need to be better people and embrace them. And she's talking about the robots and saying at some point in the future that there's going to be, she calls them synths. There's going to be human synths, humans that can run the synth robots. And she said synth brains could run humans. Literally, she says that. And then she's like, or you could have humans with synth parts, or you could have synths with biological parts. And I don't know, I'm assuming that's like a 3D or lab grown organ or something like that. So she's already imagining this diverse system of life that she has framed out as, if we do not accept this new reality, essentially like we're racist people or so, we're intolerant of this new evolutionary development that's coming. And none of it is being framed as militarized technology that is usurping nature and that nobody actually had a say. So. Anyway.
Should we go for it then?
Yeah.
So friendly looking.
I know.
If you're a company providing this service, you want to, increase your profit margin. So you're going to start trying to automate parts of this process. You have to start adding some AI into the system because you want systems that can make decisions in the way humans do. We can take a bunch of AI tools from many, many different companies, and we can put those into the robotic platform. So say you had a retail store and you wanted to attract customers. An AI system could just look for people coming past and wave at them and say, hey, do you want to come in and check out our goods? And then what can happen after that is once the person comes in and they start asking a question that the AI can no longer handle or answer, then it can seamlessly switch over to a human pilot and the human can now take control. And that process can be, completely transparent. You can either have people know that this is happening or have them not know it's happening, depending on how you architect the system. Is that there'll be this crossover period between, say for a relatively simple task, between predominantly pilot control, which is what we have today, with the AI maybe jumping in and doing little parts of the automation throughout, to, in something like 2 years' time, those AI programs being able to automate the majority of a task. So what this means for the pilot is that they now become more efficient. So a pilot can now control, say, 10 robots at the same time instead of one robot, because they only need to use 10% of their concentration of their duty cycle on each robot, and the AI takes over for the rest. The problem with these existing AI techniques, I'm sure anyone who has conversed with an AI or interacted with an AI hasn't had that spark of life experience yet. After this crossover phase into these existing narrow AI solutions, we're not going to stop there. Using research that's happening today into cognitive architectures, into the brain, and into neuroscience, is that you actually put together many, many, many different pieces of AI from many different fields, and you create something that works more like a brain than an algorithm.
So Taylorism, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have been down a version of that road where but it was all the manual labor part, less the mental labor part of being replaced. It was all the manual labor of workers essentially training their replacement, which they got machines to do little things that humans could do, and then machines were able over time to do a broader set of things that humans had to essentially teach machines to do based on how they constructed cars or how they constructed. And that's what you said. You read this was the Taylorist system, and now they have figured out how to bring that same process to to replace not just the manual, but the mental labor that humans have done. And I agree with you that like people, that certainly educators, in addition to not being concerned about the medical elements that are taking place right now, seem very indifferent to this notion of this moving forward into that future. And I can say that like it does feel like education is turning into something that is being turned into a more remote experience to simulate what looks like to be their future work experience.
I mean, do you think most people know anything about this? I mean, that's what I keep saying. Like, how can this, because I think this is pretty far gone. I mean, these, when she was talking about operating 10 robots, like that specific number came up in the Japan Moonshot project that I talk about, where it's the Japanese Science and Technology Agency, it's the government of Japan with Nippon Telegraph and Telephone and SoftBank, and also the National Science Foundation of the US and the US Department of Energy and the Carnegie Foundation and the European Union Horizon Project. It's a global project facilitated through Japan, but their first goal is by 2050 that you live outside of a physical mind and body and time and space, which again, when I first read that a year ago, seemed so far away. But when you actually look at it, in addition to the sanctuary AI robots that Suzanne Gildert is building, there's another company called Sarcos, which was a University of Utah program with DARPA money that I think now maybe got bought out by Lockheed or Raytheon. And they have exoskeletons. They're military exoskeletons, which again, they're commercializing. So even as we automate, they're saying like, hey, you could be 65 and still work in a warehouse with your exoskeleton. You can carry these heavy boxes. You're like, well, if you have all this automation, why is a 65-year-old having to work in a warehouse, period? But they've also got these remote robotics as well. So there was someone from X Prize, which is connected to Singularity University, at the presentation in Tokyo on the Moonshot project. He was pitching avatar life, like cyborg avatar capitalism, cyborg life, and what it looked like, and the image that he put up on the screen. And again, he's a guy from the Bay Area, looks strikingly like the exoskeleton VR program that Sarcos is developing. So it's all embedded, and that's why, like, I know you're saying like war, but I'm trying to figure out like who's it. Like, I think whatever war is going to be a war on life, because it's integral. Like, I'm trying to figure, I'm not to say there's no geopolitics in it, but like, I don't know. It's so embedded. Like, these companies, these multinational corporations and investment firms are so embedded in each other. I mean, at some point, maybe the AI does the calculus of what's worth having a war over, or what's the best profit margin of a war. I'm not saying, but I don't know that maybe the war as it happens is going to look the way we imagine the war happening. I mean, I think the war might already be happening, and we just don't label it as war yet. I don't know, but
let's see, Jessica or Kenny, and I'll see if I have something to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, my mind's going back to education, just thinking about the thing about the brain and what you said, Andy, about, it being, mental as well as a mental occupation, really, like, in addition to a physical one. And just this week, someone at my institution, higher education institution, was sending around, I think it was from Chronicle of Higher Education, who are horrendous. And it was all about like, who's the class of 2026 or some year that's not too far off. Like, who are they and what do they want? And it was all about behavioral intelligence and social emotional learning, right? And like measuring it, harvesting data. And of course, like you kind of said in your framing for the video, Allison, like it was all framed through diversity and equity, right? And just knowing the cultural climate right now, that framing is so powerful. like, I think it will work. I mean, I know it's worse in academia, so maybe I'm a little bit more, I don't know, like more skeptical than the average person, but it's penetrated so many areas of our lives, right? And yeah, like, you know, we were talking about the disability, you know, the guy with the prosthetic leg last episode, right? And like how that stuff, like, it's framed as helping people. And it's
if you can jump
fun.
into a robot, it's so like
Right.
it's all equal, and they can get the algorithm to totally engineer the right ratio of access and equity. But like, that's what's so weird is like within the identity space is like they've worked so hard to craft like identity and intersectionality and all of these things, and then literally the woman is saying like, it's going to be AI, but it could be a variety of pilots just popping in, and they may or may not know. And I'm like, so they make a robot, and you maybe like are over the course of an hour in a store interacting with 10 different people, and you don't even really know who they are or anything about their identity after the whole like last 10 to 15 years has been lifting up identity, and now they're just a robot. But like there is an identity, but like, what do you like have a badge that signals like on the, oh, now your robot operator has this identity. Now this is this identity. Like, and the crazy thing is like MIT has developed these badges already. And like, this is the thing that the educators don't understand. And I need to like make myself sit down and write this blog post, but all of the emphasis on play-based learning, especially for early years, and even for like adults, like adults do better with play, is that they've got smart sensor-based manipulatives. And so MIT had developed smart badges and smart tags like back in the early 90s. They were using these badges at conferences, and they would have you answer a questionnaire with like 5 questions, like multiple choice, and somehow you would dip them in a bucket to like do your choice. And so when you went up to a person, it would change color depending on how many question responses you had similar. Like before you said a word to a person, there's already a color code to tell you. You know, and I'm just thinking, like, how does this happen? And even, you know, Marvin Minsky, who was working with papier, whatever, he had on the Legos, on smart Legos, because that's what MIT did, was they created a programmable Lego blocks. And they're like all the uses, well, you could put them on a door and you could track the door. So the door would give you a greeting when you opened it, and the door could track how many people go in and out a day. And I'm like, great, now we have like QR codes and smart locks, but that's where it goes. But they've trained these kids. And this was, again, like in the mid 90s that they were already envisioning that this was coming. And I think that's the thing. It's such a slow boil, right? It's such a slow timer. Like, those guys are both dead now, but like they worked their career for 30, 40 years to get all the pieces lined up. So we can say, yes, play-based learning, active learning, smart toys. We're all just doing it so we can build our brains better.
I wanted to ask Andy, do you find, because I am finding this increasingly with each year, that gaming, like specifically video gaming, is just such a huge part of like how my students, you know, who are, most of them are like 18 to 22, you know, college students. So can't do my math backwards, right? But like they've grown up, like they were born after that stuff was already going on. And it's really horrifying. Like if I ask my students to bring in, you know, a textual artifact, like a lot of them will bring in a video game. It's just such a massive like lens through which they operate and like form their worldview. So I don't know, is that the case for your students too?
I mean, I would say that, and this has been going on for a while, and as a person who myself was raised kind of on video games, I do see more how the space of play in young people's minds that is taken up by just the digital area versus games, outdoor games or even indoor games, or even something that have physical manipulatives, that where you are interacting with another person who's right across from you, like a game, like 4 people all across a Monopoly board, or two people playing Stratego, even that kind of game, which is, again, those are games made by a company that, you know, but I would say that by and large, people's downtime, if they since our school doesn't give them access to their phones, it actually secures them in this little pouch. They still will have. Everyone's got a Chromebook, and a lot of times, the thing they are going to be doing with their Chromebook is, Snake running around, and of course there's Fortnite. There's all sorts of things, and then Roblox is a big one. That a lot of students are interested in, which is kind of connected to Minecraft, or at least it's like the next generation of Minecraft. So I do see that there's been a lot of conditioning that's happened, that could prepare people for being more comfortable in the digital world than they are in the physical world. And that would be an unfortunate, if a generation comes up and is more comfortable in this space, then there's a plan for them, because I do see, I would say, and gets me back to that, I would say in people who are opposed to the mandates, and I really agreed with what Allison said about just get the liberals and the left out. We're not even part of this discussion. All right. We're kind of like the few stragglers kicked out of our own communities. We show up to somebody else's party. But so those other people, let me just say this. When I first had conversations with people on the bridge or at these various luminary things, which most of the people who are involved in this are like, we're exiting, we're getting out, and we're going to build our own thing, and we're done. We're not even going to fight it. We're just going to try to build our own community. Most of those people that I talked to, many of them, Allison, were familiar with your work, but many of them were familiar with the idea of this is not just about mandates. This is digital IDs and things like that. What I would say is, I don't think they've come to, because I don't think we can escape it. Like, it's going to come and get us. I still would say people haven't come to grips with the degree of transformation that we are going to have to reimpose as the people at the top are trying to transform our future. We are going to have to impose our own ability to transform our own future in the way that we need to. And I don't think people have quite come to grips with how much we have to do, like what a massive transformation we're going to have to make of our own. But I actually think what we'll have to do is just getting back to things that are very natural. Like, I don't think it's about kind of being more ourselves and more human, but I don't think most people, and I would include myself, because I think it has been a journey for me, Allison, you've been part of that, when you kind of keep coming back to that indigenous way of living and things like that. And as I've come to see all of us being swept into essentially the Middle Passage kind of thing, experience. And I do think that the people haven't fully grasped, but are open to the idea. Well, they're against this digital stuff, but I don't think they fully understand how much we're going to have to fight it and how much we're going to have to take all the copper wiring out of the house.
Yeah. And it's hard when there's not an easy model, it's, yeah.
So that would be my take. But I will say that, go ahead, Allison, and go back to that education space. Good luck with that. You've already been down that road.
Well, no, but see, the thing is like, I'm not necessarily trying to save public schools, but what I'm trying to also, the other piece is that the blockchain, what's going to come, the trap that's going to be set in Florida and Texas and places, is that you're going to get these education savings accounts, and they're going to be on blockchain. Yeah. And here, libertarians, like, here's your blockchain digital voucher. Would you like to order the Lego Robotics set to your home, and your child can help build the military robots at the kitchen table and take a picture and upload it for the skills badge? And that's what's going to happen. And so, like, trying to educate those folks to say, that also is a problem. Like, that's not the way out either.
But I'll just say that, and I don't have proof of this, but I am more optimistic of talking to the parents who right now are like, I don't want my kid vaxxed, and I'm taking you out of the system for that reason alone. I think those parents are also not that excited about the things you're describing, like kids being drawn into that. I'm not saying they're completely opposed to it, but they're not that excited about it. compared to teachers who like are literally like they're from another planet coming in to try to enslave us. You know, like if I didn't know better, I would say that these people were grown on another planet because they are so bought in to and they even will call it good, and they'll buy all the individualized crap. They'll even talk about it in terms of social justice, and it's just so. But I am more optimistic about parents who are concerned about the medical elements coming to understand that this wasn't just a medical plan, that there is another plan, that's another trap is being laid for your kid. And I think people are not going to be that excited about that. Teachers, I think, are going to be the last ones. In fact, they may be enemies of this process of trying to change things. But I think I have been encouraged by the general openness to seeing that there's a lot more going on here than just a shot.
Can I say one thing about the tech stuff before, like you were talking about like a textual artifact or something, the video game, is that one of the other pieces about the Lego platform is that what Marvin Minsky said was he was talking about like behavioral change machines. And so that Legos first started off with just the bricks. And I think the first set of instructions was put in a Lego box in 1961. So like from all through the 50s, and there were you just got bricks and you just made whatever you wanted to make with it. And then they put instructions in, and then we see where things have ended up now. But the programming, they talked about like the bricks and then adding wheels and things, and so you can make vehicles. And then the next step was to have these programmable units that could then make the Legos into robotic things. And you could program them on your computer and that they would be connected. And that's what the Logo Turtles was sort of built on that. Now they've developed a new thing called Scratch. Do you guys know about the Scratch? It's a block coding language. And again, I'm not a coding person, but literally I had somebody on Twitter today say that their child was introduced to Scratch in first grade. They're now in fourth grade. And they're like, I don't really want to do that like anymore. Like I'm done with games. But essentially it's like Legos that you drag little modules on top to tell a machine what to do. And then it makes an animation on the computer. And then it also like might animate your Lego thing. And the kids, what they've done is they've created a social media platform, and they're encouraged to remix. And so my concern within the machine learning system, and like we can kind of maybe, hear from Kenny if Kenny has some thoughts, and if we move on to that other video. But once you understand it all as machine learning, I think what they're trying to do is capture like the creativity of children, like and youth, and to get their stories. Like I do feel that somehow there is an energetic force that is pulling not just data, because they've got a ton of data already. I mean, some of it's dark data and structured data, but now they want personal data. They want personal stuff. And then they want to know how your personal stuff interfaces with somebody else's personal stuff. So if you can create something, this whole push for online creation with the NFTs is part of that. But then let's all talk about it. Why don't we sample from each other? Why don't we but it's all digitally mediated, it feels like there's sort of this parasitic system that is trying to co-opt and hijack the creative, intuitive, sort of communal life force that's in children specifically, because I think children are, they're less jaded than adults in many respects. So.
Kenny, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds again that kids are the most precious commodity and tool of what you're talking about. And, and again, it's just, there's a stake for parents or people who care about, their kids. And of course, it's our livelihoods, right? Like our individual future, the near future. But, it's about kids ultimately, and protecting them and giving them a chance to be human. And have a life where they decide to be who they want to be, and they're not told and just data mined and because in some way we're all manipulated, we're all conditioned, we're all, subjected to this narrative, right? Narrative stuff, like psychological, nudges. That's what advertisement is. That's what the at least the primitive forms of it. And so what we're facing here is like something more insidious that we're trying to make sense of right here, right? And so, but we may not know fully, right, like the implications, but we just know that it doesn't feel good. Our gut tells us that that's not it. That is a dark place for those kids, and for ourselves too, because the people who talk shit, who want to talk back, who dissent, and so again, that's what's at stake here too. That ability for those kids to shape their own world, right? Because they're going to be in a world of surveillance and nudging and conditioning and programming that is way more insidious than anything we've ever faced.
Mm-hmm.
And there.
Okay. To start and to kick off AI and ML in robotics is to start producing data. And to do that, our most powerful computer we have is our brain, right? This is autonomous robots doing amazing things. And there's a big chasm here. And what's missing is real-world scenarios, real-world data, how ideas become tasks which can move us towards AI. AI is supposed to replace jobs, but what if people can control those robots all around the world and keep their jobs? Maybe one person can control 10 robots in 10 different Walmarts while we move towards AI being autonomous to allow robots to be controlled. So you have a robot and you have a request. Okay, your request gets put into as a task. It gets pushed into Exosphere. A decision happens and it publishes this to AI companies, which are partner companies of Synthium that are connected to Exosphere. And it also pushes it to humans, which we call HI. Here's a task. Who has the most confidence they can complete this task? Whoever completes that task gets rewarded. We're putting humans and AI almost against each other, but at the same time working with each other. As the robot is being controlled, all of the data is being stored in a database. And that database can be queried by these AI companies. And when they run simulations, they can reproduce this exact same scenario over and over and over again. The next time you go to ask a question for that robot, this AI system may have learned how to do that. And the more times you and everyone uses Exosphere and continues to train this database, the better that robot can cry out and say, help, I'm stuck. A human can come in, control that robot, and take it over for that last final 10%. And we call that the 10% edge case. So now what's just happened is this request has gone into Exosphere. You can see here it's been picked up by Amin. He's now going to be able to drive the robot and perform that specific task. There we go. So now you can see that Jeremy's got his drink, how well this task was completed. So was it done satisfactory? I think so. Can answer that question. Timely manner? Yeah, I think he went as fast as he could based upon the speed I did. And then, of course, the confidence and the accuracy of my description. So these answers that I've just provided have actually training an AI and a machine learning database. What we're doing is something new as an ideology that is changing how we're actually working with robotics. We also use this rating system to fuel and feed the reinforcement portion of the machine learning database, as well as we use this rating system to be able to qualify humans. We set up something called the training playground. So on the website for Synthium, under products and Exosphere, you'll find the Exosphere and all the tasks that are currently loaded. Now, these 3 tasks are always going to be there because these are training tasks. And these tasks are special because they're marked internally inside of our system that every time you complete one of these tasks successfully and actually do it within a timely manner, you will increase your human task rating, which allows companies to be able to choose you as a qualified user to control their warehousing robots or their towel delivery robots in a hotel or their medical delivery robots in a hospital. It doesn't matter what the robot is, the different level of rating is going to qualify you to be able to control those robots. Controlling a robot that I'm supposed to park into the blue zone. You can actually use a USB joystick if you plug it in as well. in my task I just completed, 31-second session has generated 463 machine vision samples for classification. Our AI company partners can use the identified machine vision images that we've taken from the robot, and they can classify them and classify objects and classify various interesting points within the image for navigation. And then you can relate those classified samples to the navigation decisions. So why did I turn left? Why did I turn right? What were my different decisions based on? And they're based on different images that are of interest for the navigation. We almost have 1 million robot connections in the last year. It doesn't matter what the task is. The more information that we can use Exosphere for, the smarter we can get it. The more data we can build, the better it'll become. And then we'll become Cynthium as a knowledge base of all of the tasks that will power the robots of the future.
Well, the first thing that cracks me up is that Jessica did not seem cracked up by that stuff. Kenny was laughing. Allison was laughing. Jessica, you were just sitting back there, just like not looking happy.
I don't even know. I'm just like, who wants this world? I mean, how is this gonna make anything better for anyone?
One person can get 10 robots going, and more jobs for robots until.
Like, how is it sustainable though? Like, I'm thinking, like, rather than just hiring a person who already exists, like, you build 10 things out of like materials that are not sustainable and create e-waste and trash and take power, and then you put them in Walmart so people can buy more shit. I mean, like, none of it makes sense. If you just pause for 1 minute, you realize how fucked up it all is. Like, where are they going to put, if you have 10 robots, where are they going to put all those robots? Like, literally, we're going to be crowded out. We're like, oh, there's too many robots.
And how many Walmarts are there going to be? If every person is controlling 10 robots. I mean, I don't want robots and I don't want Walmarts.
I just, part of me wonders, like, these people that talk about this stuff with so much emotion and passion, like, I wonder if they themselves are still human, because they've been programming, like, it makes me think of, people who spend a lot of time in nature and how their brain gets wired differently, right? Like they people start giving, the more time you spend in nature, the more you see it as a relationship, as a living organism, right? And so it makes me think about them spending time with these robots and the way their brains is getting wired. So, they are, like we talked about transhumanism, and like that to me in itself, it is transhuman, right? Like the ability, like how oblivious you are to the implications of this stuff. And just simply a simple goddamn question of why.
Yeah.
Why? What is the need for all that? Sorry. But it makes me, something I keep repeating on this show is that the more educated you are, the more indoctrinated you are into a system. And because I had a ex-coworker who's now an engineer, master's in engineer. One time we were talking about politics, and he has limitations in ways that he sees the world. And so his answer, as to how to solve the problems of the world was to produce more. This is a civil engineer with a master's degree, right? His answer to how to fix the problems of the world was to produce more, and so. And like, we're supposed to live in an age of, right, like the Green New Deal bullshit, they also consent, in the previous video that we showed, about AI. You can tell people, you can't tell people, you don't have to. Like, we live in an age of consent and boundaries, and more and more it just seems superficial. Like it just seems like we don't really want to take, and just like the attack on people who don't want to get vaccinated, right? It just seems more and more that there is no consistency. There is no consistency in principles and values, and we're already being programmed, by these systems. And so, in the highest example is these people that just spend days with robots, and all they talk is robotics and mathematics and science and measuring shit. And what about the human stuff? My partner a while back said that San Francisco is full of robots, and I believe her.
It's
So
such
that
an
we call them
important.
HIs, right?
Oh yeah.
I know. I'm sorry, but like it once, because there was a time when people were wondering, well, I wonder if they could produce a robot that would be as smart as a human. Like the notion of HI, like, or humans intelligence was there. And this guy's already said, well, look, AI, and then, oh, by the way, there's this thing called HI we may have to be throwing in here every once in a while. It's like, oh, so humans.
You hit the tree. Pull in the HI when you hit the tree.
I was like, I wonder if I could be as smart as the AI. But go ahead, Jessica. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. One of the things I was just struck by was just thinking about like conditioning, right? And some people would probably watch this who aren't as immersed in this stuff as us and be like, whatever, it's a little far-fetched, or it's whatever, kind of dismiss it. But I mean, there's so many elements just in that however many minutes that we watched, everything from the 5-star thing, right? Like we've all been doing that on Amazon ratings and Yelp and Uber, right? The whole like HI versus AI, and it's like kind of a game and we're competing, and I'm thinking, like when you start a new video game, right? Like you play against the computer and it's competitive, but also it's, it's training you, right? Like that's how you learn. The thing at the end about like the human getting a rating, right? I mean, social media, right? Like, I mean, all of it, like it's already here. And just, I mean, like what Kenny said, just like the technology, you're not just operating on the technology, right? Like the technology is also operating on you. It's so scary. I'm so disturbed.
And does it not make you wonder why more people aren't putting the pieces together? Like literally, I don't know if it's going to end up in the recording, but like at the beginning, like I was so frustrated. There was a 3-hour webinar that a friend of mine put on my radar that was at the University College Cork, Ireland. And they were doing VR installations in higher ed. And of course, they're always in the libraries. Like that's how it's done. And they're like, it's interdisciplinary. And blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And and they're all excited about all these opportunities, and they pick like, oh, look, you can like be in a volcano, or look, this like geological formation like got run through by a highway construction. You can't get to it anymore, but now we have it preserved in VR. And so they have all of these very cherry picked cases. And I'm in the chat sort of chiming in like, have you considered how this fits in with the next phase of globalization and remote labor? Like, do you understand how this fits in with blockchain credentialing and stackable badges for perpetual learning online? Like, what have you thought of any of these things? And some of it was in Ireland, but then they had panels with US folks from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, which is the home of Plato, which is the first online education system, one of the first ones. When I did a cross-country road trip and I stopped at the library where the Plato research was done, and they were often used it on prisoners. There's actually a really good book I would recommend to people called The Friendly Orange Glow about Plato and the programming and how different the experience was, but for the programmers who found it really liberating because they had the ability to make the world, and then the users who thought it sucked. And so, it was very different, like depending on which end of the software you're on, it was either great or terrible. And then they had people from San Diego State University, which is San Diego is the center for workforce pathways and income sharing agreements and, fourth industrial revolution, nanotechnology research and all of these things. And so when you start to learn the language of gaming and AI, like learning reinforcement, right? Our pathway design, all these career pathways or learning journeys, it seems very different when you realize that every time you're learning in a digital space, you're actually teaching the machine. Like, and I think people can get to the point that it's flipped and you realize like online learning is actually online teaching or online theft, of who you, like your identity theft. It's very different. It's a very different frame. And these people could not handle it. Like they were just like, well, how do you clean the headsets? And how many, what is your implementation challenges? And like, nobody was engaging with any of the material. I'm like, can you please look at this slide share from a defense simulation company that's talking about the biometric data pulled out of children in these competency-based headsets and like what that means? How can this be okay with you? Look at this as a defense contractor. This is military technology. They don't care because they're just trained to implement their program. That's it. And like, I loved reading as a kid. Like, I loved the library. We had a great school librarian. Like, I wanted the librarians to fight. Like, I wanted the librarians to be on the front lines, like, you know, but no, they're like, would you like a 3D printer? Would you like some VR headsets? Would you like to feel very important? Would you like to be innovatively disruptive? And they're like, yes, 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 yes. And then they're just done. And eventually they kicked me out. I mean, like when they were talking about empathy in virtual reality, because that's about soul theft, really, is doing empathy training in VR. And they said the people who are funding this, one of them, like T. Danny Sanford, was brought up on child pornography charges. It's not safe. And people should, like, and I just keep chasing them around going, you're responsible because you know now. You're building it.
Yeah. I mean, well, the two groups of people, by and large, I agree that a lot of folks are not, or the people around me that I work with are not thinking about where this is headed. But I do think about like the farmers in India taking down telecommunication towers. Like, why were they doing that? Like, did they stumble upon those? Like, they were seeing a connection in relationship to the things that were taking place to them as they were being pushed off or being threatened with being pushed off their land and not being able to use it, and these bigger companies basically being able to own it. And I do think, I personally think that when these Canadian truckers who definitely are talking at least about digital ID, and they have seen the impact that they've had from being able to move their trucks into this place, and how them enacting their own livelihood is connected to them having the potential to control their lives. I don't think Canadian truckers are going to just say, oh, they're automating our jobs. That's a bad luck. You know, I think by virtue of having used their trucks to try to transform and change their world, and having had some level of success and pushback, even if they're not going to get the whole way, I think they will understand that there's a deeper threat when somebody just says, hey, we've got this convenience for you. And the problem for the rest of us, and I certainly think this is true for educators, is we haven't been in that fight. We've by and large given up the idea that there's anything we can do to change our reality for us, and except for go along with it and try to find your best place somewhere along the way. So that is I feel most strongly that we saw the fact that the people in India, when they went in that struggle taught them something about the world that they were up against. And I actually think this is true with like the truckers, that and I do think there's going to be a push more to automate those kinds of jobs by virtue of what they've done. And I don't think they're just going to let them do that. I don't know if they'll be able to stop them, but I think they're more likely to resist that than teachers who seem to be hell-bent on training our replacements.
Yeah, it's really wild. At my school, just about a year ago, I think, they started this like partnership with a private, it's basically like they're outsourcing advising. So you have these third-party people who are not employed by, you know, the public university, coming in, and they're actually, like, my school uses Canvas, and they're actually in our classrooms, like on our, like, they can see everything, right? So like if the advisor has an advisee in that class, then they have access to all the material. And the faculty are kind of up in arms about this, right? Because they're really worried about like intellectual property theft and, you know, threats to their labor, right? That it's all being privatized and corporatized, right? And they see it, like they see, okay, ultimately this could lead to us being pushed out of our jobs. So it's wild to me that like they can't see that with like, well, how many years have you been on Canvas? Like where do you think that data is going? And then Google Classroom and Microsoft, whatever it is, these past 2 years, it's just like, how can you not make that connection? I don't get it.
I mean, I think some of it, like at least in the K-12 space, and I don't know about higher ed, but like teachers have been so beaten down that the tech companies have all this money to throw at them and time and to say, like, we care about you. You're important. Would you like to come to our conference? Would you like a tote bag? We'll train you and we'll tell you you're wonderful. And like after a decade of doing that, like you'd have to like be a pretty tough person not to fall for it, right? Like if you're like in a crappy job and nobody's really appreciating you except the technology companies, and they're like, you're a doer and a leader and a this and that, and you're be like, yeah, like because you're gonna feel validated by them, and so of course you're gonna defend that. Like, when the Chicago Teachers Unions turned around and like threw a hissy fit about having their Google Classroom turned off, and I jumped on and like put 500 tweets to be like, wrong discussion. Like, don't be defending Google Classroom. Like it's going to Bluffdale. It's not, you're training a replacement. And I'm not saying Lori Lightfoot is a great person, but like they're polarizing this for a reason, like to create a spectacle that is totally not about the thing that you need to be worried about. Now, is Canvas connected to Instructure?
Yeah.
Okay. So can I just chime in? Like, so my one piece about this is that like I went to, maybe at the end, Annie, we can put a link. But a year ago, I did several talks in the Salt Lake City area. And so much of this stuff is embedded in Salt Lake City. Actually, the first virtual object that was ever designed was designed at the University of Utah. So all the stuff that's like in a game, like the first one was made there. It was a teapot that he made this mathematical shape and like put in the internet. So and the internet was birthed outside of Salt Lake City. So anyway, so I did all of this field work, including going to the NSA Bluffdale data center. And I went to Instructure. I went to the Instructure and Evernym, which is the Digital Identity Center. And they're both like wedded together in this. And I truly believe that the Instructure is about the data, the interoperable data sets and the networked data sets. And to understand, like when they want to talk about impact, really they want to see how things are weighted, like rating relationships, like all the stars and, the checking and the ratings of people. I think it's all about mapping the social networking to create not just a simulation, but to somehow learn how societies work. Like, I feel like there's something in there that's trying to learn how it actually works. And so the fact that it's in Salt Lake, and again, we're going to go March 19th and I think you could even sign up for it online, although there's like a small fee, the Mormon Transhumanist Association. And the whole thing is focused on decentralization, very heavily libertarian leaning. People from the Charter Cities movement, which is Paul Romer out of NYU, sort of states of exception. You just carve out bits of countries that are in the middle of a country and have a company take it over, or some other government take it over. It's crazy, but that's all mixed up in Salt Lake City with Instructure too. So I feel like it's feeding this transhumanist program. Evernym is connected with Learning Economy Foundation, with the World Bank. And it's all linked to your digital identity, your digital twin.
And could I ask one question that maybe it's, because we did start with the discussion about blockchain. What can you just make sure it's to spell out, if I understand this right, the connection between AI and blockchain is like the required data collection architecture that allows all this data to both be collected and to go to the places it needs to go in order for the AI to be developed. Is that how these things are connected? Yeah.
I mean, it's the interoperability. So like in the video where it said, oh, there's a task here, let's put it in an envelope and send it to the platform. Like when it gets sent to the platform, if you do a request to like do that job or to try to compete with the AI for that job, it's going to sort you based on data in the blockchain. Now, what they will say is it's private, right? Like the machine will know what your rate will sort through your stuff, and you'll have to allow access to that. and they'll say it's private, but if you want to do the job, you have to allow access to that part of your identity. And then the AI is going to access into that. And so, and it all has to happen at scale, and quickly. So I think it's meshed in with the quantum computing. Like they're going to have to get the computing power up there. But it's all of the automation, and people, while they say it's private, like the MIT, they had something called the Enigma Protocol that morphed into something that's now called the secret network that essentially allows for querying on encrypted data. So they can do data analyses for these impact markets that I talk about a lot without necessarily exposing your PII. Like it would be a cohort, right? Like here's a cohort of people who went through a training. Here's a cohort of people who went through a treatment program. Here's a cohort of people who, were identified as having this medical whatever. And then that stuff can be queried in aggregate to fulfill the needs of the financial markets. And so, it's private, but just having it be private isn't going to stop the impact markets or the spatial web. And I think increasingly it's going to start to be seamless because you'll have all these tokens and you're wandering around the metaverse with sensors, and you'll be able to do or not do things based on what's in your digital wallet, whether that is held on a phone or in some sort of biologically based sensor eventually. And you won't even think about it. Like that's what they talked about. What is it? The invisible rainbow or whatever. Like at first, the electricity wiring, like when it was gas and electric, like the electric wires were out all over the place and you can see them in the knob and tube. And then they went into the wall and then you just didn't think about it anymore. And that's where they're trying to get with the Internet of Things and the biosensors, I think, is just like, at first it's clunky and it's attached to a device, but eventually it'll just be seamless. And all of that will need to run through the blockchain because everything is a choice architecture. That's it. It's all coding and it's all choice architecture and weighting and predicting. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean,
kind of.
It's not. No, it's just not good. That's made, but it. I think I understand how that would work.
Well, and the frustrating thing on the not wanting to, I mean, not that you're not wanting to understand, but people who are embedded in the system, like I had this pretty extensive exchange with the guy and he reached out to me from Learning Economy Foundation. And I sent him a link to a paper by Melanie Swan. And I recommend everyone look her up on blockchain. And she's talked about like transhuman blockchain brains, like that you would enter into problem solving digital arrangements. Like imagine a room, a quote unquote digital space where some of the presences are not actually human, that are machines. Although if everything just has a gamified avatar, how will you even know? It's like in that robot. Well, you might be an AI, it might be a person. You don't have to know. Like that's on a need to know basis. So you're in a room, you might be with a person, you might be with machine, you're solving a problem and you're getting paid in sort of tokens. And she talks about that. But one of the other things she talks about literally using nanotechnology in people's brains, in the neurons, those having nanotech on the synapses. There are like 3 different kinds, and that they would regulate the activity or track the activity in the brain using blockchain and using literally a blockchain economic, like an energy economy system to manage the neuronal like activity for this transhumanist process. Now, whether they've actually accomplished that yet, or this is sort of theorized, but I shared this with the Learning Economy Foundation guy who's talking about like paying people for learning. And I said, this is the end game of your learning economy. It's nanobots on your neurons in your brain with an energetic economy. And he just like quickly replied back, well, we're not doing that. That's not the thing we're doing. And I said, that's totally an inappropriate response. Like how many people would get a paper? And it was like with the ResearchGate link, how many people get that paper? And your response is not, oh, but I'm not doing that. Your response should be, oh my gosh, where did you get that? What does that mean? Why? What? Mm-hmm. Like that's the right response. And I told him that. I'm like, it's not a passing the buck or deflection. This is huge. Literally, we're talking about nanobots engineering your neurons. You're not allowed just to be like, yeah, but that's not the thing I'm doing. Or like, yeah, that's not the program. The program I'm doing wasn't actually funded by the child pornography billionaire. It was the one across town was funded by that, but not mine yet. And And they seem like such significant things. They're not minor things. They're really big things. So I don't know. As Cliff says, you put your intentions out and they go where they're supposed to go. Maybe there was somebody on that University of Cork webinar who like thought twice. I kind of thought that I saw one of the faculty people like have a panicked look on her face when she was looking through some of my links. I do that to people.
Kenny or Jessica, do you have any things you want to add or ask? I mean, I don't think there's much. I don't really know what to say. I think this is for me mostly we'll be talking more about this, Allison, but I think this has been helpful for me to kind of connect again. There are these discussions that are going on about blockchain. Can they be used? Can Bitcoin, can it? And what I think we're laying out here is that this is not about Bitcoin. This is not about currency even. I mean, of course, there's going to be a digital currency. This is about a construction of a technology for restructuring and structuring society across the board, and then really displacing humans by learning what humans are and seeing if they can make ones that, I don't know, just that do human things more efficiently, and then eventually maybe even they'll be smarter. I don't know what they think about it, but we are in a big way training our replacements. I guess that's the thing.
What I would say too is that this is not about you going home to do whatever you want to do, with your life, in abundance, right, of things for you. Yeah. It's not, it's not that utopian picture of humanity. It's about, to me, what I see is more misery, in the process of implementing all this. And we already, it's already happening right now, with this quote unquote pandemic, that has greatly accelerated all this. And again, like, if anybody this is new to somebody, like, and they have the urge to dismiss us as conspirational, just go to the World Economic Forum website, like, just read out what they're telling you, and what they want to do, read some of the white papers that you've pointed out, Allison, and make a decision, right? If you think that's a better world, and I'm not saying like right now is a good world, and I'm not saying like, and I would want to stay stuck here and, in kumbaya, but what I'm saying is that the world is taking shape is not in our hands, and so when I look at the truckers in Canada and the farmers in India, who manage to go on strike, right, and motivate people to go on strike, massive strike, 300 million people, because some of my friends told me before, Kenny, it's so hard to organize, in this country. This country is big, the United States.
Yeah.
And so, like, people have different ideas and stuff. Yeah, have you paid attention to India? And I understand that it wasn't, and they not only, do they have a lot of things that we don't have, right? But they are also subjected to the biggest biometric surveillance system that exists in the world right now.
Yep.
And so, I think they know more than we do, like in resisting, in trying to fight back, in understanding life and nature, I think, because exactly for the same reasons, because they have the things that we don't have, and maybe we have too much shit that's programming us already, and we don't see, just, we're getting programmed like those fuckers that spend time, too many hours with robots, and playing video games and Instagram and the TV and Zoom. And so I would invite them to look into those places, the places where there is joy, right? And because they were still dancing. The Canadians, they were playing hockey on the fucking ice, like a miserable cold. People in India were protesting in the fucking heat, and I've seen people rise up in worse conditions, with daunting, like odds against them, and so like again, like Lipson, I've asked him, and I still, don't have an answer. Why do you do this? Why do you fight? Why have you done this for so many decades? And then his answer is, my other option is to go home and play video games. And so that's what I guess I pose to people, and that, one is not just about vaccines. It's not just about, vaccine passports. It's not just about blockchain either. It's not just about capitalism. To me, it's about humanity and trying to find out what the hell does that mean for you. Because if it means being connected with a robot, well, I guess I'm in the wrong world.
Jessica, do you have any thoughts?
I don't think I can top that.
Or Allison, anything you want to, final words here?
I appreciate you guys being willing to spend some time to lay things out more. And like I said, I think the mobilization with the truckers is really good. I think there are some concerns about the cryptocurrency and people sort of separating out that, like, our own digital currency system, is going to work. A lot of this is narrative building. And I worry in some ways. I have my friend Steffers, who's very knowledgeable about such things, and she's been following it, but she's concerned that it may be like include some AI simulation, like scenario training, which again, not that any of the regular people on the ground would necessarily know that, but like, these, it's complicated. It's all complicated, but it is good to see people mobilized. And, it'll be interesting to see if the health stuff backs off for a while, if what happens in the schools, what happens with the parents, because a lot of the parents have been very activated around issues of the masks. And also, unfortunately, I'll just say, like, the social emotional learning stuff has become conflated with the critical race theory stuff. And I think that was done on purpose to inflame and misdirect people around what's really happening. And those people don't understand social emotional learning is linked to these social impact markets. They don't know about Clive Bellfield's, 11% return on investment on social emotional curriculum. And so they sort of double down, like, unfortunately, making the identity politics stuff worse. And I think that that's all part of how that is playing out. But maybe parents will start to wise up. And if we can talk about impact markets and talk about like the broader picture, we'll get there. But clarity is important. And I don't know. I guess it's a little complicated.
Yeah.
It's sort of an outlier and things. So I'm like, no, we actually have to be very clear about what it is, because there's so much manipulation of the narrative, whether people know it or do not know their role in it, that until you can become clear about the nature of it, you're not going to be able to come up with an effective strategy against it, because they know and they're gaming it. The AI, all of the data and all of your reactions are further feeding and reinforcing the system and the decision architecture. So like, I think from a place of moral fortitude, like as Kitty said, like, you have to figure it out for you. Like, don't rely on somebody else to tell you. Like, sift the information and decide where you stand, and then be firm, but don't sample all sorts of contradictory information because you just like a lot of interesting people in your media feed, and then weigh it all equally, because it's once you make certain choices, it means these other choices are going to have to fall away, and just be clear about that. Like, and I'm not telling you what to choose, but choose it from your heart and do it for a principled reason.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, what I would say is, I believe, at least in this anti-mandate audience, I sense more openness to this stuff. The digital part is more something that people will talk about. I think the economics part and the financialization element is farther behind, because I think that even for me is still, I'm trying to make sense of it. But I do feel like there's an openness to learning about that. But it will require some actions on our part, and I don't think we've figured out we haven't been able to accumulate people around us to do something to then take a stand somewhere together. A lot of us have just done our individual things, and it's come at a cost or a price, but it hasn't led to something that would make us feel like we could control our world.
It's hard to know what to expect.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think, just to add one quick thought, like just thinking about some of the defensiveness and dismissiveness that, you know, all of us probably at some point have kind of voiced in this conversation, and, you know, our frustrations reaching out to people who should really be in solidarity with us, like even from their own self-interest. I don't know, maybe this is like a generous take, but I do think stuff like blockchain may be part of what's so hard for people, or like, I mean, I had a hard time I still am having a hard time like wrapping my head around it fully. Is maybe it's something like you kind of have to play like mental gymnastics even to just kind of get into the perspective of people who create these things, right? Because it is so anti-human. And so I wonder if that's part of, I don't know, why it's so hard for people who, you know, are good people and are trying to fight for a world that they want for their children. But it's just, I don't know, it's weird stuff and it's dark. And so it is easier to just be defensive and like, oh yeah, that's bad, but that's not what I'm doing, like you were saying, Allison. And I don't know, it's the stuff is,
but like literally with his program officer contacted me first, and I said I don't really like see myself talking with people who align with the World Bank and the MIT war machine. Like I'm not. And they're like, but we're not. And I'm like, here's 2 screenshots from your own webpage that says you are. Don't lie to me. Don't be a liar. You know, like, we can have a difference of opinion. Don't lie to me. So, but I agree. Like I have a college age child who has really rejected me over all of this. And it's hard, I love them. And I know that I think eventually at some point they'll realize why. And I know in their heart, they know I'm not some monster that they've imagined me to be. But they're just keeping their distance because I think, if you're 21, you don't want to look at those videos and say that's the future. Because if we feel overwhelmed and we're like, people with a certain amount of life experience, I can't imagine what it would be like to be a younger person in all of this. So that's why I try to take such a firm line for like the people coming up behind, is like some of us who are on this edge generation of the digital sphere, like we're the last ones to be able to say what it was before, or at least partially before. You guys are younger than me, but they're not going to be able to say. A 4-year-old is not going to be able to consent to building a world of telerobotic labor on blockchain. And if have the fucking conversation in public, you know what I mean? Have the balls to have the conversation to say like, this is the best we can do, is to run the world like this and have one person run 10 robots in 10 Walmarts. Mm-hmm. That's what we're building. Damn it. And then just like own that, as opposed to like pretending that you're doing something beautiful and giving good jobs to good people, because that's not what you're doing. But everybody wants to be good. I guess I suck at like uplifting people and making them feel good. I mean, everybody wants to be their better selves. And always like, So.
I feel like, people who will hold a line and not waver from that, they always pay a price for doing that. And I think you have had to pay a price for saying, no, I'm not going to give on some of these things. I'm not going to try to pretend that there's something good that's crossing this line here. But I appreciate, because Allison, I think, you and I have had some like discussions before about how to approach things and stuff like that. But I feel like your steadfastness is invaluable. And I, by and large, feel like most of the things you've stuck to and talked about, I don't like them, but they are explaining what I'm seeing in front of me that's coming. And so I don't think we'll be able to stop it unless we can get an idea of what's taking place. So that part, like, I think you've had to pay a price for it, but I think it's really the strength you've had. That is a strong thing that you're giving, or you're contributing to the possibility of us actually stopping this.
I think you also, like, those people like you, Allison, those people who are willing to hold the line, like, you have to be well. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I don't mean this in like a judgy or mean way, but I mean, a lot of people are very unwell physically and mentally, mostly, through the fault of the systems and environment that we live in. And so it's maybe not so surprising that, it takes a level of fortitude and resolve to, fight.
Yeah. Well, and fortunately in a position, at least at the moment, that I have the financial resources, like the space to do the work, right? To like spend the time to have, like, it takes a lot to have free time to think things, right? And to have enough stability to think and project. And that's something that people who are living from crisis to crisis and overwork and gig jobs and like, they can't. And I think that's the hard thing within the identity politics space and the left space that I was even seeing in Philly before the pandemic, was that because of my background, I would be dismissed of like, you don't know my life experience, go sit in the corner and wait till we call on you. And I'm like, but the problem of structural racism, colonialism, imperialism it's not one racist, like, we both have to figure it out, because like I bear responsibility. Like, you can't just be like, well, you're not part of the like, I'm not going to tell other people what to do, but like, I know the stuff that I have to do to try to fix the stuff that needs to be fixed. And so I'm not going to just be a passive waiting around type of person. And because for whatever reason, I have this gift or curse to have to tell this thing. And I can't just sit because nobody else is doing it, right? If there were some really super effective, people from these communities who were able to articulate this story in a way that could mobilize other people, then I would just sit down and go, great, you guys are doing it. But it hasn't happened yet. Or maybe it is, and I just haven't run across these people. So anyway.
I think you're bringing up, the fact that to fight this is not just about learning about what the hell blockchain is. We have to discuss the other things, that potentially can divide us and separate us from us, getting, that future that we want, right? Like trying to shape our society. And so I guess my point is, like, that's, I think, why I'm honored to contribute to this show, is that we talk about those other things too that are important. The identity politics, the racial politics, we talk to people who we're not supposed to talk to. Some people have that in mind at us because we like Joe Rogan is getting shit, right, for talking to different people, and even though like I don't agree fully with his worldview, I respect that he's doing things in earnest, and so I guess my point is, yes, it's not just about the technology. We cannot become those robots, right? Like, right. In like in my own personal journey, trying to hold the line, trying to stay up front. The cost that I didn't know I was paying was that I was losing myself to the work too, and I am.
Yeah.
Because because trying to. Like, right, like trying to stay present is the biggest human thing, right? Like I'm kind of like, that's why I'm Buddhist, I guess, of sorts. I like principles and like mindfulness, right? Being present, and it's not just about you; it's about the community that you have. And so my point is, yeah, it's not just about the technical aspects. It's not even about just the theoretical Marxist stuff. It's about the ability to continue to learn, even in place and push and try to be part of places where we are rejected too, because like otherwise, like we're not going to fight back just by being in those isolated communities. That is a false sense of safety, right? Just like we tell people that, think nationalism is safety for them, just being like community. I'm also reading the parable of the sower.
Oh yeah. She's amazing.
Yeah, and so again, it's about multitude of things, and that's what being human is. Like, it's about multiple of complex things that, you know, sometimes just are, you know, and you can't define, it shouldn't be measured, but they still need to interact, right, to create something collectively. Otherwise, we're at war, you know, and trying to cut each other's throats, and, you know, and so, yeah, it's just that's what I appreciate of these conversations, that, you know, it's just not just technical mumbo jumbo. We talk about life, our own experiences. You know, that's why I share my own experience with the whole vaccine thing, and it actually reached some people. You know, I actually had some people that apologized for being participant in the harassment over not being vaccinated, and so that's a step forward. Mm-hmm. You know, and acknowledging, and then this person who I talked to about vaccine passports called me crazy. Then now it's like a little more receptive about it, you know, and a little more cautious. And so I'm talking a lot about a lot of things, but I just want to second what Jessica said. Thank you for holding the line. You know, and it's important, and your work has been, you know, instrumental for me to also understanding this moment, and for a lot of people that we are in touch, that will come in touch through this attempt of resistance. And so your work is out there, and, you know, and is echoing in many places at the moment.
Yeah. And thanks for visiting us again, Allison. It's been a while. I think some people were expecting us to do the part 2 of the.
I know. I owe you the Orozco. My computer died, and then I lost a bunch of links. So I do want to get back to it. I want to do it that justice. So
I have also sensed that you've kind of gone down this other road of investigation. So you needed to do, because like a lot of the stuff you're doing with Jason, what's his last book? Bosch. Yeah. So you know, you kind of get into things, and then you just go down these roads, you know.
Legos. So. Oh my gosh. I didn't even get partially, but yeah.
Okay. So, well, again, thanks, Allison. And that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast there and connect with us. If you like anything you heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 8 platforms on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Telegram, or Rumble. And if you'd like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. So once again, Allison, thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
And Jessica, I think you're going to be a more long-term member, so thanks. And Kenny, we'll see each other next week.
Thanks, everybody.